Okay, welcome back to the show. Liberal MP for Goldstein, Tim Wilson. Tim, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
No worries, mate. So you're in Hong Kong recently, on Monday, in fact, for just 24 hours, speaking at a conference for The Economist magazine. In that time, you also managed to fit in going to the protests in Hong Kong. What's the scene like up there?
Well, like any country or any city where there's protests, the vast bulk of the city is completely relaxed, normal, and people getting on with their lives. But there are flashpoints, and particularly along Gloucester Road between kind of Wan Chai and Causeway Bay on Sunday afternoon, there was a lot of intensity. But the vast majority of protesters are people saying we want to fight for our future and they want a vote on their future, as well as a whole series of other demands. And we're doing it peacefully because they know that their future is on the line.
That's interesting that you say that it's only at a few flashpoints. How many people are still taking part in the protest, do you reckon?
I don't know the exact numbers, but there were certainly tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands on the weekend. That's obviously not the same as it was a couple of weeks ago where there were about 2 million, but I think people know that it's heating up, and so they've also, the Hong Kong authorities have shut down the train system on the weekend, so it's very hard to get around. If you know Hong Kong, it basically lives off the train system, so I imagine that makes it harder for some people to get around to get to the protest. But it's pretty serious, and these people are on the front line of the contest of two very different worldviews. They've picked the Liberal Democratic side, and I think we have a responsibility to support them.
Now, what was the craziest thing you saw in your time at the protests?
I'm going to say there was nothing particularly crazy. It was the craziest thing was the weather. It was bucketing down with rain, but it didn't deter that many people, and so there were just lots of people with umbrellas, but marching down the streets. I caught the ferry from the Kowloon side over to the Hong Kong Island side, and I saw some kids, with masks who obviously were protesters, but there was this point where somebody shouted out something in Cantonese. I don't know what it was. But then the whole ferry just responded in unison with a response consistent with the protesters' messages, and you realise that this is history being made.
It's a pretty contentious time for Australian politicians on this issue, and I know a few of them aren't too keen to wade into it. So, what made you, actually join the protest, and have you copped any pushback for it?
It is a difficult time, but when you think about the free people on the front line of a choice between two differing worldviews. As a Liberal Democrat, I obviously side with those wanting liberal democracy. And obviously as a backbencher, not as a minister, I don't represent the government. I just basically represent myself and my constituents. And I thought it was the right thing to do. Happy to be held accountable to my constituents about that. But I haven't received any pushback. In fact, it wouldn't surprise that many other Liberal Democrats have probably said that they thought it was, maybe at times courageous, but nonetheless a bold move and one that they supported, because I think people know just how serious the situation is. And when you've got people on the front line of two competing worldviews and they're pushing for the types of values that we believe in, that it's probably a good thing to support them.
Now, we talked earlier in the show about the troubles that NBA and South Park have gotten into regarding China this week. What's your take on that, the balance between, corporates trying to balance their bottom line and doing the right thing? Do you have a view on that?
Well, I just think the NBA is sold out in their capitulation, frankly. And I think it's really disturbing and disgraceful. They're not the first, though. And I think we need to acknowledge that, whereas I much more appreciate South Park's approach, which is to laugh at those censorship, because the one thing that authoritarian regimes can deal with is reasoned debate. What they can't deal with is ridicule for their positions and their behaviour and pointing out the absurdities, that their solution to people are criticising for censorship is censorship. I think humour is a critical part of the political arsenal to fight for the type of world that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I just like reflecting on the fact that Winnie the Pooh is actually banned in China, just to give you an idea of how thin-skinned totalitarian regimes can be. Now, Pete and I found out about you being in Hong Kong for the protest when you put up an Instagram post about it. And the Instagram post said the last time you were protesting in Hong Kong, you were also wearing a pink polo t-shirt. So what was that protest about? And what is it about pink polos that get you feeling the spirit of the revolution?
The pink polo was just coincidental, but the last time I was in Hong Kong was in 2003 for the WTO ministerial, and I was protesting for free trade and the case for free trade. That was back when the last time trade policy was exciting and interesting. It went through a bit boring period, and now we're back to interesting. I remember the photo clearly, and so I actually just remembered I wore the pink polo, and I just thought it was kind of a way to add to a very serious point something a bit lighthearted.
So you don't look to the pink polo if you just need a bit of pep in your step on a busy day?
Oh, no, I've been involved in many protests, and many have been sans pink polo.
All right, well, that's good to hear. Now, because nothing anyone ever does can be greeted well on the internet, you've been copying it because you tweeted, "Send in the water cannons" about Occupy Melbourne protesters many years ago. Do you want to explain why Hong Kong protesters are not like Occupy Melbourne protesters?
Well, firstly, that tweet was made in 2011, and I'm going to break it to some people who have obviously lost their sense of humour, like the CCP. It was actually a joke, but people like to bring it up. I also think it's extraordinary, frankly, that you get all these people who see me in Hong Kong protesting against an authoritarian regime and the right of people to be able to do basic things like vote, and their response is not to say, "I don't like Tim Wilson, but I agree with him on this." Their first instinct is to try and delegitimise me and do the de facto work of the CCP for them. They're sort of useful idiots of the world. But there is a difference. The Occupy Melbourne protest, and as the Occupy movement, was a group of people who couldn't achieve what they wanted through democratic means, so they chose to occupy public land, and their intention was in perpetuity till they made their point and everybody came to agree with them. The people who are protesting in Hong Kong are actually protesting for their right to vote. And that's pretty much the base of it. They've got some things about anti-corruption and police brutality and everything else, but that's all very, localised and to do with past issues. That's the sort of fundamental principle, to be able to decide their own future and self-determination.
Yeah, I do like the idea that because they've never done anything to support China themselves, they just look at you and just go, well, how can I bring that down? It's just such a wild thing.
But that's okay. History is replete with useful idiots from the left somehow doing something to either delegitimise opponents of authoritarian regimes in Western liberal democratic countries, and they're just adding their name to the roll call of useful idiots of history.
All right, last question I got. Would you have had more sympathy for the Occupy Melbourne protesters had they been wearing pink polos?
Look, I think the pink polo is a bit too cool for school for the Occupy movement. And the truth is I actually have some sympathy with aspects of what they were trying to achieve, because some of their criticism was right about the unaccountability of people who'd done the wrong thing and bank bailouts, and philosophically I have some sympathies with that. But I also don't believe that you just get to disobey the law, because we operate in a society of laws, have to have some respect for the rights and freedoms of others, for people to be able to live their life, and that's what they weren't interested in doing. And around that time I sent out that tweet, and because I remember it very clearly, they were basically being arrested because I think they'd been in that space for about 2 weeks, and there were allegations, particularly overseas, of nefarious conduct that were going on in Occupy sites, and there was actually a very credible reason to deal with what was becoming increasingly a public health / public order issue.
All right, brilliant. Tim Wilson, it's so awesome seeing an Australian politician take to the streets in Hong Kong. Thank you for doing that, and thanks for coming back on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, mate.